So now I think what we'd like to look at in terms of as we're going forward is that the adultery and homosexuality both are condemned to death, as you heard me read early on, and wanted to make sure that we got that done. That those who commit adultery, and we've looked at some things, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in detail as we go forward over the weeks. But those who watch pornography do both things. If you watch pornography, you commit adultery, to be sure, but you also involve yourself in sodomy. Now, you may not think so. Listen, I used to watch porn when I was in prison. It was how I got by. I indulged in porn every opportunity I got. In fact, we passed magazines around. Occasionally, someone bringing a tape. But I watched it. Particularly Club magazine was one of my favorite, and I don't mean to make any way promotion of this idea, but I do want to express that I know what it is. Hustler magazine. And, you know, in the prisons across America and the world, you know, men use pornography. It's the next, not necessarily the best thing, but it's the next thing that can be used, other than just plain old memory or fascinations. But I did use it, and I know what I know what my spirits were. I remember vividly. I'll have to tell you, sometime shortly after prison, I've seen porn in other states as well after prison. But one of the things I want to warn about pornography and about adultery and about those who make judgments about such is that pornography, really anybody who watches porn is a homosexual. Now, you may not realize it, whether you're a man or a woman, because ultimately you find yourself observing the organs and the participation of the pornographic act of both parties. Generally, if you're having sex with a woman, that's just what you're having sex with a woman. But that isn't what it's like with pornography. And one will argue, well, Pastor Benny, I see why you got this thing against pornography or against homosexuality, not pornography, but against homosexuality because of some of the things that you've encountered yourself, and so you want to try to stamp out some of the things that you went through. You can argue that, but I want to make a better argument against your argument, because people do that. And across the prisons at night, whether you're involved in sodomy or homosexuality, and it's very pervasive inside prisons, you can hear the moans going up all over the place at night of men with men. It's disgusting. It's contemptible. But it's very present in prisons, and it's what people do. There's a movie called Life with Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence and several other big name stars, and I think one of the person that died of AIDS, a comedian, his name was whatever it was, he died of AIDS recently. It was or more over the last couple of years. He played the part of a lover of a homosexual man who had been converted to homosexuality while in prison down in Florida, and everybody understood it. Everybody knew that they were lovers, and that's how it went on and on and on. And the day came for the prisoner who had become a homosexual in prison, for him to be released. He was sitting there very sad, and Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy, I can't remember which now, why are you so sad today? And he showed him the letter that he's been released from prison. He'll be released tomorrow from prison. And his sadness was this: he had become a homosexual in prison, as so many men do. That he said in a very poignant and very painful scene, he had a handkerchief tied around his head like Bahama's mama. He wore the tight clothing because everybody knew he was a homosexual. He was, and he said, I can't go home like this. I can't go back to my home like this. And so rather than being released from prison, he ran to break and was killed by the prison guard. He would rather die than go home a homosexual. And that's what homosexuality does. And that's what people who are pushing this whole idea that it's okay do to people. They push it on you, and you find yourself something that you never wanted, but it becomes a part of the process. And I think that that's a very powerful scene in that movie. But men become addicted to it. And I watched it. I never participated in it, but I certainly saw it happening in prisons. The first same-sex marriage I ever encountered was in 1977, if I'm not mistaken. It happened with a homosexual man named, and he called himself Bahamas Mama. He wore tight red pants. So they let him walk around the prison like that. Red bandana around his head, a halter top. And, one day, their marriage I was out in the yard. It was Saturday, I think it was, or a Sunday. Out in the yard, just kind of, staying away from the cells. And I see this big commotion going over about a canteen. And there was a wedding going on. And Bahamas Mama was marrying a man. And the man that married these two men got married in prison, right? By a fake preacher. But all the prisoners respected it. It was a duly organized, authorized wedding. The prisoners respected it. And the man that was marrying Bahamas Mama thought he had achieved something great because everybody wanted, well, at least most people wanted Bahamas Mama as their lover. It's very sickening. This is in 1977, long before probably Obama ever dreamed about becoming the mascot, or that America would ever pass a law, or that many people are calling themselves homosexuals and perverts today, and maybe they don't call themselves perverts, ever dreamed about it. But I saw it. I witnessed it. And it's something I will never forget. Two men getting married in prison. And many of the people that listen to me weren't even born at that time. But yet that's how pervasive it has been. And that's the kind of thing that all the men were swooning over Bahamas Mama, except for me. And I do mean that truthfully as I stand here tonight. But I will say this, that when one judge, well, you just are against homosexuals because of your experiences. That may be, I may have my experiences. I can't discount them. It's a part of my life. But that's not the reason why I'm against it. I'm against it because God's word is against it. And not only that, but it's unnatural. It is, if you, and others have tried to argue, especially the students from New York University last week, tried to argue that if people feel that way, they ought to be able to love who they want to love, etc., etc. But if you take 500 LGBTQ persons and put them in a city and on an island by themselves, all men, and you take another 500, all women who are lesbians, LGBT, all women, put them on an island by themselves, and they have no opportunity to get off the island. They can get married, they can work, they can have sex, but only in the homosexual genre can it be done. The issue here, and the fact of the matter is this, is that soon they will die because neither one could produce any life. You cannot convince me. I don't care how eloquent your argument is. I don't care what newspaper you get to support you. I don't care who you think you are. You could be, it's whatever you is. You cannot convince me that God would create something that cannot create life. The trees bring forth life. You can take a tomato and it'll bring forth more tomatoes. You can take cantaloupe, it'll bring more cantaloupe. You can take okra, it'll bring forth more okra. You can take oak trees and they'll bring forth acorns and more. There is nothing in the universe except the LGBT community that can't produce life. You cannot tell me that's God's plan. You can't argue with it. There is no argument. There is no argument. It does not produce life. It only brings death, and that's exactly what LGBTQ is, death. I'm not against it because of its horror. I admit it. I was tempted in prison. I thought about it. I will not lie to you. I didn't do it, that's for sure, but I did think about it. And it was everywhere. It was all over the place. But it doesn't bring life. It destroys people. I had in my encounter being the pastor of this church, as we push back against these people who are labeling us and saying all these things. I'm not a hate preacher. And I curse everybody who's ever called me that. I'm not a hate preacher. This is not a hate church. We only preach God's word.